Thank you, Dave. Um, I'm excited here to speak to you today. So, welcome to Bellevue. Can't think of a more beautiful place to have a conference. And welcome to Replay. I think this is such a neat opportunity for us as temporal users to get together and to be able to share some learnings. Well, I'm Justin. As Dave said, I'm a VP of engineering at Twilio. And Twilio is about empowering connections with our leading communications and customer engagement platform. Now, how many of you are users of Twilio? I actually think I see hands raised, which is awesome. You all have been users of Twilio, because you have either received a text message or whether or not it's received a phone call from your Uber driver or a notification from a DoorDash order or an email through SendGrid. So I'm guaranteeing that all of you have been a user of Twilio. Now, I guess one thing for just engineering-wise, how are we oriented and such, right? Is that we have very much an Amazon/Netflix engineering philosophy. So we are thousands of software engineers that are on hundreds of software teams, and we have a DevOps philosophy. And DevOps best encapsulated by you build it, you run it. And I'm responsible for an organization called Product Platform. And Product Platform, as Dave was kind of speaking, is comprised of our Edge platform, which is both our web and API gateways, our identity platform, which is auth-N and auth-C, so all authentication and authorization, human and machine scale, integrations platform, our webhooks, infrastructure, and our web platform, which is our console experiences. And one thing that our customers really value about Twilio is trust and scale. And how do we really quantify the trust is we build highly available systems. So my teams are operating 5 to 6 9 SLOs, and sometimes up to 7-9 error rates, 7-9 error rates. And this is on the order of, last week we did north of 16.5 billion API requests. Over the quarter, our identity systems service 1.3 trillion API requests. So if our teams are having a bad day, Twilio and a lot of the internet's also having a bad day. Now, it's through that lens that how important it is for us to find a trusted partner, and we're happy that Temporal has been a very reliable partner for us. Now, one of the teams that is under my remit is the Edge Services team out in Spain, and they are a platform team that is enabling Twilio to get onto Temporal. And so we'll go through kind of how this evolved and such, right? Now, a little bit about workflow history at Twilio. First off, how many here have more than one workflow system in your company? Right. It's many hands go up. Unfortunately, it seems that every company has at least 3 workflow systems that are in their company and such, right? And Twilio was no different. So one of the first workflow systems that was started very on was a PHP orchestrator. So Twilio started as a polyglot, and so we had Java, Python, and PHP. And one of the first orchestrators was a ill-named and malign service called Dominatrix. I can't tell you how many times I'd have people come up to me when I took responsibility of this and just go, I'm offended by the name of this service. Can you please get rid of this service and such, right? Now, outside of the name, one of the challenges was that all of the workers were written in PHP, and as we started to kind of consolidate to JVM languages, this code just became legacy. And as we started to have less engineers that were able to write PHP, had challenges. We also leveraged one of the platforms that we went to was AWS Step Functions. And so AWS Step Functions was starting to kind of get used like throughout Twilio. And what we found with it was that the developer experience wasn't the best. Being able to kind of craft some of the orchestrating things in either YAML or JSON wasn't as intuitive or natural as it is with being able to write it in code. And then we also have like database polling apps. And so sometimes what happens is a team will go off and start to have maybe a basic workflow service. And when they start to like look out in the environment and start to think about like what is necessary, oftentimes what happens is a team will just say, well, I'll just kind of queue this into a database, and then I can just write another job that's going to go and pull that, that database. And it's I think, a naive approach, and it underestimates the complexity that comes from having to build a type of system. And more importantly, as it scales, that database becomes a bottleneck and a SPOF. So at Twilio, we had all of these. In 2018, we started to talk with Maxim, and at the time, I believe he was maybe even, or he just left Uber, and we started to talk about Cadence and their workflow system that they had developed at Uber. And it's interesting too, because we were also talking to Netflix Conductor, and it looks like now Netflix has converged on Cadence, or sorry, on Temporal. And so I'm thinking we made a good decision here to kind of go move towards with Temporal. Now, what are some challenges that we've had in kind of like the adoption of Temporal and then also kind of into Temporal Cloud? Well, as we kind of talked about, our workflow sprawl. So we have a wide array of workflows systems. How do we kind of get people to kind of go and converge? Another reminder here, and an additional bit of context, is remember we have kind of independent DevOps teams that are largely, it's okay for them to go and choose their own technologies and such, right? So one way that in which we've found and that's been useful for us is to establish a technology radar. And this is a concept that came from ThoughtWorks, right? And so in this, you have various rings of technologies, and you can map various technologies onto one of these things. So there is hold, like do not go and deploy any more, use this technology anymore, right? Assess, this is, hey, we're looking at it and we're doing some POCs to see if it works out, right? Trial is a little bit more expansive, and then adopt is like, hey, you have free reins and please kind of go and utilize this. And Temporal is in like kind of like the adopt ring for us. Now, there also is a certain set of governance as well on this, on how do you make sure that people are abiding by the tech radar and such, right? And so at Twilio, we leverage our architect community to really know what is the tech radar and to be able to connect the dots. And we have architecture review boards in which we're looking at new technology, and anytime a new service is being built or we're taking a look at use cases, we can steer them towards going down to technologies that we have in our adopt phase. Or sometimes don't use these other technologies because they're in the hold. So Temporal is blessed technology at Twilio. Now, another thing that was a challenge at Twilio was database sprawl. We have independent teams. And so from that, we had a plethora of databases that we were like leveraging behind the scenes, from self-managed MySQL to CockroachDB to Cassandra. Now, some of the challenges with this is that initially, a team will maybe develop some expertise with a particular technology. More often than not, our services outlive our tenure at the company. And so what ends up happening is you have people and services and technology that at the time, maybe a small set of people kind of like you and can leverage, but then over time, you still have to maintain and run this, and there becomes let's say a brain drain of how to kind of run and operate this. And there's just this really, there's just, I think, a common paradigm of just not invented here. I have some technology, I think I can do this better and such, right? And so part of our job, at least I believe, like in leadership, is also to kind of make sure we're building the right things and making sure that we're having value differentiated work versus non-differentiated work. So this is Simon Wardley, and he has a process called Wardley mapping. And with Wardley mapping, you can kind of go through and start to look at what things should, once again, maybe be like commoditized, and maybe this isn't something that you should be, and really be focusing on the differentiated work that your company does. And then through this, we realized that managing a MySQL server is probably not something that like we really want to be doing. So we started to kind of go and have a movement into managed services. The way this tied into Temporal was that we were, one of my teams, this Edge Services teams, was running the Temporal cluster, the centralized Temporal clusters for the company. There were 40 namespaces that were like within this Temporal cluster, and there was an associated Cassandra database with it. But once again, this was a service that then had gotten shifted over to the team, and the team didn't have like Cassandra experience. So this ended up bringing us to Temporal Cloud. And over the course of a year, we migrated all of those namespaces from that centralized platform run internal Temporal instance or cluster to Temporal Cloud. Now, what were some of the challenges of the migrations? First off, we have different domains. And so there's different teams or different orgs, and how do you kind of go and make sure that we have clean separation? We really want to make sure that we're as cellularized as possible. So if one area has failures, we don't see that failure spread more. And so we heavily utilize namespaces at Twilio. And so each team, when they are starting a new project, they will go through a namespace onboarding, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Another thing that to kind of consider is that there's differences in the types of jobs that are running. Sometimes a compliance job could take weeks to a month for it to kind of complete, versus maybe a short-lived job that you can assume will be executed within a minute or seconds. So when we were doing the migration, we really had to be cognizant of really the challenge with the long-running jobs. How do you make sure that you can kind of go and have the long-running jobs and have them be moved over? And so we ended up using a redirect and drain strategy. So at a certain date, per se, like in the migration, we would say, okay, all new jobs are going to be moving over to Temporal Cloud, and then allow these older jobs and the longer-lived jobs to kind of drain off and move off. PII data, so personally identifiable information. Trust is the number one thing we sell. We adhere to many kind of compliance regimes and such, right? And so with PII data or PHI data, health information, the strategy is kind of multifold. First off is don't send the PII. With this, being very cognizant about what is in the payloads that are going off, and teams have to, first off, when they're onboarding, specify their use case and analyze the data to make sure that there isn't kind of PII or PHI in the data that's going across. If there is data that is in there, we will send a key over to Temporal and then come back and then hydrate from that key later when we have execution so that the data never leaves kind of Twilio. In certain cases, maybe there is some PII that is necessary to kind of move off, and in which case we leverage KMS and an internal service called encryption decryption service, and just making sure that we encrypt all data that kind of goes into Temporal. For our namespace onboarding, when we're doing this, we leverage onboarding checklists. And so we go through just the various things to kind of go and make sure that we're complying with all of the issues that could be kind of coming on board and such. Now, in terms of our wish list, so some things that we've wanted and such, right? One is a Terraform provider. We are provisioning these namespaces, right? And we want to avoid click ops. And so we would love to kind of like have a Terraform provider to go and create these namespaces for us. And happily, there is one now. So we kind of have seen that like, hey, a Terraform provider is out there and like we can go and leverage that. So that's super exciting. And that is in, I believe, public beta right now. Service accounts versus MTLS. When you connect up to Temporal, you do it over mutual authentication, MTLS. That infrastructure, we ended up having to build a certain amount of some internal services to go and make sure that the end teams were easily able to go get the certificates and apply them in their own environment. So that was kind of like, I guess, some non-differentiated work, right? And I asked and felt that it'll be easier if we could just get a service account versus MTLS. And then from what I've learned is that this is actually in a pilot stage right now, and so it's going to be kind of coming soon. So that's fantastic. And then another area is that when you have a federated system and you have these 40 namespaces, how can you go and make sure that we have like, and there's only one bill, how can we go and break up that bill into the various things to the various teams? And so we've wanted namespace usage reporting to kind of come as well. And that, I believe, I've heard is kind of like there's namespace admins now. But one thing that is kind of missing right now is our namespace tagging and hierarchy. And so with namespace tagging and hierarchy, we want to be able to take a namespace and tag it and then be able to make sure that even on the bill, we can kind of go and see this, or necessarily applying kind of security constraints and making sure that we can easily apply common security things across different namespaces as we see them. So one thing that we really appreciate is that Temporal has been very eager to kind of have open up and take our requests, and then there's follow through. And so I think that that's another important aspect of why we appreciate them as a vendor. So in kind of closing, some key takeaways. Avoid the sprawl. You want to be intentional. It's so important. It's very easy when you're kind of like in a fast mode to just be building, but just really be intentional about, hey, is this differentiated work? Is it non-differentiated work? What are the technologies that we're using? Are we gaining leverage by consolidating onto smaller amount of platforms or smaller amount of technologies? Or are we not gaining that leverage because we have a wide plethora of technologies that we're utilizing? I'm sorry. And then also just the governance. Just making sure that we are choosing the right tech and avoiding not invented here, and then also taking in consideration your PII and your personal identifiable information, right? And then I guess lastly is just choosing a trusted partner. And happily, we've been really pleased with where Temporal has helped us and such, right? And then as we look towards the road ahead, where do we see our relationship going with Temporal? It's only continuing more and more. And in fact, I have 2 team members that are here today, and one of our, what's under our charter is the account systems. And we have multiple companies that we've bought in the past, SendGrid and Segment, and we're looking at how are we going to be unifying the account or like namespaces across these, and how do we take our life cycle for accounts. And so when we take a look at something like Nexus, which is going to be able to execute a workflow across multiple domains, that's really, really exciting and interesting to us. And I'm just looking forward to our continued relationship with Temporal. So thank you very much.